All right, guys, so today in front of me, I had the newest releases from Jack Daniels. This is their Bottled and Bond Bonded Tennessee Whiskey, and they have their Bottled and Bond Triple Mash Blended Straight Whiskey. What a beautiful presentation that Jack Daniels delivered with this one. It's absolutely beautiful. When I received this box, I had no idea what it was until I saw the outside of the box where it had a nice little plaque that said Jack Daniels on the front. Open it up to this beautiful presentation booklet, 2 Bottled and Bond whiskeys from them. Definitely excited to get into this one, guys. So without further ado, let's go. All right, guys, so let's go ahead and take a closer look at some of the details on these bottles. Jack Daniel's Bonded is a Bottled and Bond Tennessee whiskey that is crafted using their time-honored recipe of 80% corn, 12% malted barley, and 8% rye. Not to be confused with the old Jack Daniel's No. 7, these barrels were carefully selected by master distiller Chris Fletcher and team, making this one a big, bold Tennessee whiskey. Again, this is aged for at least a minimum of 4 years, coming in at 100 proof. Again, this being Bottled and Bond. Guys, let's go ahead and get into the nose on this one. Yeah, so the first thing that I get, you do get that like banana bread aspect to it. There is some baking spices in there, like a little bit of cinnamon, a little bit of nutmeg in there. I think the caramel and the vanilla richness on this one is what really kind of separates this from some of the other Jack Daniel's expressions that they have. Yeah, it's like this really nice, just banana bread, caramel, vanilla, very, very rich and savory on this one. And there's like this undertone of some of these baking spices, some cinnamon, some nutmeg. Yeah, there's also like a little bit of this like honey too, like a caramel, vanilla, honey sweetness coming from it. A little bit further away from the glass is where you start to pick up some of those baking spices, the cinnamon and the nutmeg. But that banana bread is a little bit further into the glass as well. Let's get into the palate, guys. Cheers. Yeah, so right away on the front of the palate, a lot of caramel, vanilla richness, a lot of sweetness there up at the front. And then into the middle of the palate, you get this like there is some of that banana influence there that's on the middle of the palate. Also picking up, I do pick up a little bit of the rye spice that sits there on the middle of the palate too. Not so much the flavor, but just actually the spiciness from the rye. And then into the finish, it transitions into a lot of those baking spices. There's some paprika in there, some nutmeg, some allspice. Not getting too much like cinnamon on the palate like I thought I would, but there's definitely some paprika, some allspice. A little bit of nutmeg in there as well under the finish, and it's a medium finish. The baking spices just continuously kind of just linger on right there on the back of the palate and into the finish. It's actually really, really nice. Let's get into the second sip, guys. Cheers. Yeah, so second sip, still kind of consistent. I do pick up like a little bit of like a darker fruit there on the front of the palate with some of that caramel vanilla, maybe like a date or like a fig there a little bit. And then into the middle of the palate, again, you're still saying that, consistent with that. There's that banana note. And then again, the baking spices are really kind of, from the middle of the palate and into the back, into the finish, is really where I think this one kind of shines through. Some of those rye spices mix along with that, like that little bit of banana. And then into the finish, like I said, those baking spices, that paprika, allspice, some nutmeg. There's a little bit of black pepper in there too. Just baking spice kind of dominant there onto the finish. And like I said, that it does kind of linger on. It's a medium finish. It's just the baking spices just continuously just mingle around there into the back. It's really good, really good. And actually, to be honest with you, it actually drinks a little bit hotter than 100 proof. I wouldn't necessarily say it's because of the spice, like that rye spice, because it's only an 8%. But I think it has a lot to do with some of those baking spices that are just really sitting there on the back of the palate, making it feel like it's a little bit hotter than it is. Let's get into the last sip, guys. Cheers. So that third sip there changed a little bit. So again, front of the palate, you're still getting a lot of that just like sweetness, that caramel, vanilla, maybe a slight little bit of honey there on the front of the palate, tip of the tongue. Middle of the palate, some again, some of those like rye, the rye, the burn, the rye spices, the banana. There's a sweet oak that starts to develop in between the middle into the back of the palate, which is really, really nice. Wasn't expecting that. Didn't pick it up on the first two sips. And then into the finish, again, it's just really, middle of the palate into the finish is just really where this one shines through. This is baking spice dominant as it continuously lingers down into the finish. Just the allspice, the nutmeg. A lot of allspice and nutmeg on this one. A little bit like a paprika note and some black pepper that's kind of mingled in there together, flowing through into the finish. I tell you, for being a minimum of at least 4 years old, this does taste a little bit older to me than 4 years. I don't get a lot of those youthful notes on it. You do get that, like I said, that typical that banana note that Jack usually has, but it tastes older than what it is. And I not only just like on the mouthfeel, just like the overall notes, you just don't get a lot of that youthful like corn. With it being an 80% corn, it's very high. You don't get that corn sweetness, though. It's more vanilla, caramel sweetness. I think they really did a fantastic job here with this bottled and bond Tennessee whiskey. All right, guys, so the Jack Daniel's Bottled and Bond Triple Mash Blended Straight Whiskey is made up of 3 unique bottled and bond whiskeys. It's made up of 60% of Jack Daniel's Tennessee Rye, 20% Jack Daniel's Tennessee Whiskey, and a 20% Jack Daniel's American Malt. Again, this one comes in at 100 proof and is bottled and bond. So let's go ahead and get into the nose, guys. Yeah, very different nose on this one. This one is definitely, you do pick up some of those rye, those rye spice notes on this one. Pick up a lot of honey. There's a lot of honey influence on this one. Very nice sweet honey, nice caramel note to it. I do pick up, there's actually there's some clove on this one too. Wasn't really expecting that, but a little bit further into the glass, you do start to pick up some of that clove. But those rye spices are definitely dominating. That Jack Daniel's rye that has a 60% blend in here, you definitely start to pick up some of those rye spices. Really nice like caramel, vanilla mixture along with those rye spices in there though. But there's like a really sweet honey that's kind of mixed in there with some of that vanilla, some of that caramel. Yeah, I mean, really, really nice on the nose. It's not like overly complex on the nose. Again, it's very, kind of rye spice dominant. But there is like this little bit of like a bready note to it. Like some bread drizzled in some honey. There's vanilla, some caramel in there. A little bit of cinnamon in there as well. All right, guys, let's get into the palate. Cheers. Whoa. That is good. I was not expecting that on the palate. Huge just rush of rye spice dominating the front and to the middle of the palate. You actually do pick up a little bit of that like the rye graininess, the flavor of it, but it's absolutely delicious. I love that the rye grain flavor that I get from that on the front of the palate, but it's mixed with like a little bit of sweetness too. Some of that vanilla, some of that caramel kind of shines through. Then on the middle of the palate, again, those rye spices start to slow down a little bit. They kind of like dissipate, and then into the back of the palate, like this sweetness, just so savory. Vanilla kind of caramel flow through and into the back too. So it's like, that sweetness kind of goes away in the middle of the palate, but it's there on the front and then into the back of the palate. That was a really, really good first sip. Really like that. Let's get the second sip, guys. Wow. So this is very unique. There's a lot of different flavors going on there on that second sip. Like, so on the front of the palate, again, there's still some of that. There's like some honeyed sweetness, some vanilla, some caramel, but there is a lot of that. There's a lot of that rye influence that just sits there and saturates the front and into the middle of the palate, leaves it like nice and spicy, kind of tingling there on the front and middle of the palate. And then into the finish, like I start to pick up, there is a very, very slight hint of some of that like banana in there, but not a lot. But it's more towards the finish than it is anywhere else. But then there's some baking spices again that kind of flow through into this one. A little bit of cinnamon on this one. Maybe a little bit of cinnamon, some allspice on this that kind of flow through and into the back. But like what I really like about this one is like the mouthfeel on this is just, it's great. Just like the flavors just sit there and kind of saturate the palate. Like I said, I'm that rye spice is just still sitting there right on the center of the palate. Starts to breed this little bit of like a lemon zest there on the side of the palate, a little bit of citrus. It's very, very unique. I mean, I love the mouthfeel on this one. And just the flavors just like continuously evolve. It just kind of sits there. This would be a really, really nice whiskey to sit next to like a campfire and kind of drink slowly. This is something you could actually like just kind of sip on and take a while with it, because it is it is very mouth coating, and like I said, it's really kind of saturated the sides of my cheeks and then the middle of my palate there. I really like this one. This is good. Let's get into the last sip, guys. Cheers. So just like with the bonded Tennessee whiskey, this one tastes a lot older than it is. I know it's only aged for a minimum of 4 years, but like on the middle of the palate there, I do start to pick up some of that sweet oak as well, with some of that like that rye spice. But on the front of the palate, it's some caramel, vanilla, some honey. Those are kind of like the undertones. But then, like I said, that the rye spice, the rye aspect of it is just amazing on this one, because it's not overly dominant, because you are still getting some of those like the undertones of some of those other flavors, the honey, vanilla, caramel on the front, but then the rye spice, the actual flavor from some of the grain. But it tastes older than what it is, and it drinks hotter than 100 proof. And I think, again, that has a lot to do with some of those baking spices that are, and rye spices that are kind of on this one. You do pick up some of that little the banana note there, like towards the middle, like the back of the middle of the palate and into the finish with some of those baking spices. There is a really nice like white pepper note that kind of flows through into the finish and keeps this just continuously like lingering on. I really, really like this triple mash here. Again, just like this, the sweetness, like the undertones of the sweetness on the front of the palate that kind of flow through and transition into some of those rye spices. I really, really like that. And then into the finish, they kind of flow through into there with some of that white pepper. There's like I said, there's some nutmeg in there, some cinnamon, like spiciness, like a red hot. Big fan here of this this Bottled and Bond triple mash blended straight whiskey. So I want to thank you guys for tuning into this episode of Dusty Dan's Whiskey Reviews. I want to send a big thank you over to the team at Jack Daniel's for supplying me with these bottles to review on the channel. Not only were both these bottles amazing, guys, but the presentation that came along with these bottles was just second to none. Beautiful box. It had a Jack Daniel's plaque on the outside. Both of these sat in foam inserts on the inside of the box, along with a Bottled and Bond booklet that came along with information about the Bottled and Bond Act, and then information about both of these bottles. I can say, both of these were absolutely amazing. The bonded Bottled and Bond Tennessee whiskey, it was big and bold. It was savory. The flavors were just, the flavor profile was very different. The triple mash to me was a real winner. I was not expecting that kind of flavor profile coming from that. You do get some of those on both of these. You do get some of those that Jack Daniel's banana note, but really just different, a lot of different flavors, and they were just very savory and rich and mouth coating. They saturated the palate. Very, very impressed here by both of these whiskeys here from Jack Daniel's. So if you guys are looking for more reviews like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button, bell notification to be alerted of any upcoming reviews or live streams. You also find me on Instagram at Dusty Dan's Whiskey Reviews. And until next time, guys, stay dusty.